Before we continue, I'll quickly just give a disclaimer that whatever we discuss, you are not representing any organization. It's your own personal views that we are discussing.
Yep, absolutely. That's right. These are definitely my views, right?
Absolutely. All right, perfect. Let's start. First of all, I'll ask a very basic question on the current reading list that I was discussing. So you have spent 35 years helping developers experience the future. In your current reading list that I saw, you noted that Enrique's idea that was if you are not the model, you are the harness. Looking back at these shifts from open source to cloud and now to AI, do you think harness engineering is a completely new discipline, or is it just the 2026 version of good old-fashioned systems architecture?
That's a really interesting question. Um, so is it the same or is it something completely different? So, I mean, in some respects, it's similar, right?
Mhm,
So if I look back to when I started working with cloud, 2008, the first probably maybe 4 or 5 years, the emphasis and focus on cloud was technology, right? It was like this thing can do this better, faster, cheaper. Um, uh, from a technical perspective, right?
mhm,
But really, what we discovered was actually the real benefit of cloud was more around how it helped the business be more agile, how it helped the business reduce costs, to manage their kind of like or rather shift from capex to opex, and how that effectively encouraged, supported, magnified their ability to innovate. So
mhm,
really, cloud actually was, something very different to the business as it was to tech. And it was only when the tech people realized how to position it to the business that they started, taking cloud seriously. Now, the path that organizations took to adopt cloud from what they were doing before, okay, I'm seeing very similar patterns with the move to harness engineering, agentic AI.
mhm,
So, there's the um, we want to do it. How do we do it? How do we do the change management piece? What does it? And from an internal practitioner perspective, I speak to developers who have uncertainty and they're not sure about what it means for them and their career and their job, right? So there's it's very similar. They're not the same, but the actual overarching similarities are there. And if I look even before cloud, when we went from mainframes and network machines to virtualization or again similar patterns, right? There's a seismic shift in technology that brings about new ways of working, and there are people who have invested their time, effort, to learn those ways of working and those skills, who now feel that they are no longer relevant.
yeah.
They feel threatened, and so there's friction, right? And that is a discussion as long as time, in the last 35 years, and it's different
Yeah.
from in technology compared to other areas, right? I speak to people who work in engineering. They have new materials, new ways of working, but not on the same scale we do, right? Um, so I think what that means is that, if you look and project forward, we can imagine there's going to be other seismic shifts in 5, 10 years time. In fact, probably shorter, because these tools are, the rate of change that they're bringing
Right.
is exponential, right? So I think there are some truths that remain, and that is that, having the ability to learn, unlearn, relearn, that mindset is really, really important. Okay, not everyone maybe thinks about that, but that is a crucial skill set that will stand you in good stead. So those sort of things, right? Actually, Dr. Werner Vogels from Amazon, he I think did the best job at capturing kind of these things, these characteristics as part of what's called the Renaissance developer, right? The first one being curiosity, and that is actually linked to the learning and unlearning kind of thing.
Right.
Then there's the ability to communicate and articulate exactly what it is. So this is how you focus in problem solving, right? The third one is systems thinking. How how the fact that going forward, the most important skill we're going to have as technical people is to understand the impact, not just of one component, but on how it actually affects a broader system and how those systems fit together. Ownership, which is really important in this new world. And then finally, polymath, which is basically the ability to have domain skills across different areas, right? I think this is kind of like, for me, I really like that formulation because it kind of characterizes what I saw over the last 35 years of people who were very effective of going from developers to architects to, to further. And I think that those skills remain true in the current world.
Makes sense. Yeah. Uh, my next question is, let's dive straight into the harness meta. You flagged an article on the harness tax. When developers build complex scaffoldings like linters, evaluators, and state managers to keep their AI agents on track. At what point does the cost of maintaining the harness outweigh the productivity gains of the agent?
I mean, that's a great question, isn't it? And that's an unknown as well. But I think we're at the stage where there are no right answers at the moment. No one knows, so we're experimenting. We're all learning.
Mhm.
In fact, it reminds me very much of the early days of cloud, where people were doing things and then sharing, for example, how they could scale while saving crazy amounts of money, right? Or how they would be able to do something they would ordinarily would never have been able to do, right? And I
Mhm.
think that that's where we are at the moment with the cost of setting up your tools, right? Um, Over the last 18 months, when I've been talking about various AI coding tools and agentic AI coding tools, the one thing that I've realized is that every 3 months I have to throw everything away, right? And start from, okay, this is the current good, right?
Yeah.
So um the reality, okay, where we are at the moment with the tools evolving and maturing at the speed they are, that tax is real, right? There is a requirement um to be constantly experimenting. And I think part of the reason for that is that this is new. This is all very, very new, right?
Right.
Working with non-deterministic tools and trying to understand how we can get them to work in a more deterministic way is effectively what harness engineering is about. Okay, it's about managing, the risk, because I mean, let's be clear, non-determinism is an absolute feature. It's not a bug, right? So we want to know, we need to know how to leverage it in the right way. So this is why time invested in this is not wasted. So I understand the question. At what point does it become too complex?
Yeah.
Um, I don't have really a good answer, other than the fact that I think you as a developer or you as an organization need to be tracking that at some point, because I think when I look back at some of my early kind of like ways of harnessing the model, they were very complex, but they were able to achieve. So when I was using Amazon Q earlier on, in order to get a happy path, it required a significant amount of work from me. Um, Fast forward like 6 months, 12 months, that effort goes away, right? But the learning and the knowledge stays, right? So
Mhm.
what I'm doing, okay, is still relevant and still important. It helps me understand how the LLM, or what the LLM needs. So I would say that time spent doing that is never wasted, right?
Yeah.
Especially as if you take the view that um, that scaffolding, or that work you put together is going to be automated or assumed by something, right? But your knowledge is still important because it's how it works. So
Mhm.
that's my takeaway, is that yes, there is a tax, but you are learning how these things work. Again, the systems thinking, you can apply that. Um, I think a good example, okay, is the context rot, okay, context failure modes. We saw like early last year. There were like 4 or 5 main context failure modes, including the fact that models, they tend to forget the bit in the middle.
Mhm.
Um, we learned through actual use that models were not very good, or when you provide context files, the temptation to provide very, very big ones actually ended up providing or giving worse results, right? And so we kind of we so 12 months ago we kind of landed on these kind of good practices, good current practices. But for fast forward more recently, some of those practices now are being challenged, right? And there is a danger that we do something like 6 months ago, and that becomes
Mhm.
dogma, and we still keep doing it. I think this is why we still have to keep testing, keep running your evals on your harnesses to validate improvements or changes. So yeah, so I think we're still at the stage where that work is valuable work. Is I guess what I'm saying.
Mhm. Makes sense. Yeah. My next question is on the vendor lock-in risk. You also shared a case study where Anthropic cut off an organization of 60 developers. Like if our harness is tightly integrated with a specific sort of providers, APIs, or tool use quirks, how do we architect an open source harness that remains model agnostic?
Mm. I mean, this is a problem that I think that we will begin to see more of. And I want to be clear. I don't think I think I don't think that was an issue with Anthropic, right? That was just, I think, just the fact because they did solve the problem, right? So they were
Yeah.
able to then get back. So there was no long lasting, I think, damage done there. But I think it did raise questions, which is why I shared it, right? So we do need to think about this. But this is the same conversation we were having with cloud, right? 15 years ago. In fact, it's the same conversation that businesses have had over the last 30 to 40 years, right? I mean, many organizations have a vendor lock into their email system, right? Or their CRM system.
Yeah.
So do companies want to change their email system the next time that Exchange goes down, or Outlook? I don't hear those conversations, right? So I think the cost of having multiple vendors, or the locking into one, what it does have a cost and risk associated to it, as well as a benefit, right? So I think that's something that businesses will need to do, and I think at least in EMEA we have the kind of the additional piece around data sovereignty, right? And how Europe wants to increasingly have more control. But when you start looking into it, okay, you might be able to use an open source model, okay. Although I would say that there are very few models I'm an open source guy, right? So there are very few models that fit the open source definition for me. I don't believe or agree with the OSI's definition of open source AI. Um, so there are most of the models are public weights, right? Models. But you can deploy, you can find a hardware provider, or um, sort of data sovereign compliant provider of capacity. You can run a model, okay, and you can think you're safe, but it depends on what degree. I mean, the silicon, right? It's still going to be probably Intel, right, or someone created outside of your digital sovereign area, right? So I think that's definitely something that's looming. Um, so the way that I like to do is that depending on the customer, if it's sort of like highly regulated and they've got concerns, then you do have options to architect solutions using tools like OpenRouter that allows you to configure whether you serve local models or not. AWS offers a lot of models on Amazon Bedrock, okay, and there you have the ability to trust AWS effectively to have those models in single tenanted environments that no one else has access to, right? So I, for example, use Anthropic tools through Bedrock, okay, because that way I guarantee that no one's looking at my data, right? And I trust Amazon's terms and conditions. Okay, they're absolutely rock solid. So I think you've got options, right? As to what your what your I guess what you want to do, but I would say is that, running inference, right? Running a model is not easy. It's
Yeah.
not. And so I think organizations that are taking the approach that we need to run our own model, I think that's fine. But for me, it's the same argument as to why I wouldn't run my own data center or my own workloads locally, right? Um, Someone like AWS can do it way better, right, than I could, right? They've got the
Right.
skills, they've got the operational excellence experience, um, and also they're on the hook, right? If I'm just paying them, then if anything goes wrong, there's consequences, right? So I think companies thinking about vendor lock-in and thinking that they can run their own models, yes, you can. Technically, it's feasible, um, but I think that it's a I think it's something that will. I mean, it kind of reminds me of the early days of cloud, where everyone thought they could build these their own their kind of their cloud. They were called. I'm trying to remember what they're called. Cloud something platform portal. No, cloud something portals. I mean, there were loads of companies that came out, and they basically what they did, they sat on top of your VMware infrastructure and gave you a cloud-like experience, right? And tools like Eucalyptus, for example, gave you EC2 API compatibility. But
Mhm.
and in the early days of cloud, I saw lots of companies implementing their own developer portals for cloud, and they all failed, right? And they all failed because of the simple reason is that you're now putting an abstraction layer on top of something that's moving very fast. Unless you're able to move as fast, your
Yeah.
users are going to always complain and always moan, right? Now it might be okay to do that for some really super sensitive workloads. Maybe that's still an option, right? So maybe I don't think this is an either or. You can combine your approaches. But what I will say is I think the vast majority, okay, will be happy to use a single provider because the benefits far outweigh the disadvantages, right?
Right. Yeah. Got it. Uh, my next set of questions are on AWS and cloud native domains. Uh, let's look at this through the AWS and open source lens.
Okay.
AWS built an empire on deterministic decoupled services like Lambda, SQS, EventBridge. How does a non-deterministic AI agent fit into a cloud-native harness? Like, should the harness live inside our existing CI/CD pipelines, or does it require a completely new type of event-driven runtime?
That's an interesting question. Um, so I mean, if you take cloud native applications and there's lots of different flavors, okay, of cloud native. Um, what I'm seeing is that, at least on the AWS side, putting AI capabilities within those cloud native services and capabilities is something that's been happening over the last 2 years, right? And whether you're using Lambda functions to do serve model, for example, or call a backend AI agent, they're like first class citizens now, right? So you can easily incorporate AI into your cloud native applications. If you're Kubernetes and building container type applications, we at least on EKS that they've been providing those capabilities around things like shared GPU access and design patterns to deploy AI for many months, right? So again, I would say that it's now just become another set of capabilities that you can build with on cloud native, right?
Mhm.
Whether we need a separate set of primitives or not, um, I mean, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, what I'm seeing is that existing infrastructure is, I guess, there are new patterns. So a good example is sandboxes, right? Agency sandboxes, right? That's not a new primitive. That's something that containers can do. So a lot of organizations are spinning up containers to run their agents in these sandbox environments. Now, is that a new thing, a new capability? I don't think it is. It's just a new pattern. So maybe it's more accurate to say that we're going to see more patterns, different patterns. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think hard if I'm seeing any new cloud native things. I mean, there are new projects, right? So there are new projects around things like routing routing LLM requests. There's new projects that kind of have AI in the center. But that for me, that's no different to new projects going into CNCF around observability or doing cloud events or something like that, right? So I think that's just the natural order of things.
Got it. Uh, the next question is on the open source leadership. I mean, you have 25 years of open source leadership. Right now, most harness tools are proprietary or highly fragmented. And you also said you have a different definition of open source. So, what open source standards or primitives do we need to establish so developers can build reusable community-backed harnesses?
Yeah, I mean this is a really interesting one for a number of different reasons, right? So first of all, there's the actual kind of AI what below the line, which is like for me the actual foundation models and LLM tools that allow you to serve up and host inference or train LLMs. Right, that's one thing. I think those tools are pretty mature. They use existing open source licenses. Um, then you've got the ones above the line, right, which is basically the framework. So like the Crew AI, the LangChain, the Strands agent, which if people reading this haven't tried it out, is an open source framework that's come from Amazon, but is probably the easiest and nicest way of building agentic AI applications. It's Apache 2 licensed. So I think those licenses, those regimes, I think they're I think standing so far, they're okay. I think where it's getting interesting is the fact that an AI and open source projects are currently struggling with the fact that these AI agents are creating code, right? And maintainers are drowning. So whether it's an AI project or non-AI project, okay, there's more code being generated now for open source projects. But there's some interesting there's an interesting dilemma, right? So the the US Office of Copyright in 2023 reaffirmed that the output of generative AI cannot be assigned copyright.
Mhm.
Okay, now copyright is the fundamental mechanism by which open source works, right? You, as a developer, create some code, you own the copyrights, you assign a project via a license, okay, an open source license. So you
Yeah.
still, if I make if I make a commit in Kubernetes, I own the copyright of that, okay, but I license it under whatever license Kubernetes is. I'm assuming it's either MIT or Apache. Um, there are things called DCOs and committers contribution uh, what they're called contributor license agreements that you basically hand over your copyright to the project, allowing them to do things like relicensing. Okay, so it's quite controversial. Some developers don't like them, but that's still
Yeah.
all on the basis of this, this fact that you own the copyright. A lot of code, right, is being generated now just can't be copyrighted, right? So there's this big unknown, right? We don't know,
Yeah.
right? If I was to use Claude to do a PR on a project, um, and it wrote 100% of the code, right? That code cannot have a copyright sign on it. So there's this bigger kind of like this elephant in the room at the moment, where no one, which very few people are talking about, and we don't really know what this means for open source projects. So I think that's for me is the thing that I would really love to see some clarity on. Okay, because at the moment it's all speculation. I'm not a lawyer, therefore, I'm not qualified to talk on this, but it's um it's definitely something that we're beginning to see. Some of the open source foundations have statements on their website stating how and when you can use these things, but ultimately the fact that these tools don't allow you to assign copyright is a big challenge, I think, coming up. So I suspect that will get addressed, but I just don't know when. So that's for me, from an open source perspective, that's the biggest challenge I see. The challenge around who owns the intellectual property and how can that be assigned to a license,
Correct.
as well as the challenge that maintainers are struggling, with the overload, of code. And obviously, we're hearing as well about how new models like Mythos are basically going to be provided to maintainers first to do defense work from a security perspective,
Mhm.
identify new 0 days, which is awesome. But this is an extra burden, right, on open source project maintainers, and there are tens of thousands of projects, right? Not all of them are going to be doing, following up. Excuse me. So yeah, so I think these are the challenges I see at the moment.
Got it. Yeah. Uh, I mean, time is already up. I'll just ask one last question that is on the knowledge gap and the book that we are working on. Uh, Based on the tools and opinion pieces you have been analyzing, what is the biggest knowledge gap developers face right now? Are they too focused on building the agent's brain that are prompts, or they're completely ignoring the nervous system, which is the entire environment?
What's the biggest gap? That's an interesting one. I think I actually think the biggest gap is, um, and this may be a parallel, but I think I worry that these tools make us generate code faster. Okay,
Mhm.
um, when we have more code, that's going to put pressure on other systems. Okay, so the SDLC we have and we know is today, the process and mechanism, so Agile, Scrum, the way that we've typically done from customer to production, right? How
Mhm.
we've articulated requirements, how we've documented designs, all that kind of stuff. That all, I think that is the bit that I don't see people focusing on. They focus on actually learning the tool, but not zooming out onto the broader impact. So for me, I think what we're going to start seeing soon is that the impact of harness engineering is at a very kind of like granular level, which you can see, which is basically better code, faster code. But I think that leads to something, right? That if we have better code, faster code, if we have better harness engineering, what are the ramifications of that on the team structure, right? The workflow that we use, um, you know uh, how we actually get work done, right? So I think those that for me are the gaps that I see, right? It's the broader, the more that and this is always the way, right? It's always the way.
Yeah.
When cloud was out there, um, companies were busy, deploying to cloud, and then all of a sudden there was this emphasis on, oh my God, we've got all these big cloud bills, right? So what do we do now, right? Because they did it too late. I think
Mhm.
actually, I mean, token economics is a huge, I think, gap. I do see a lot of people creating some stuff in his space. So whether it's tools to help you compact your context, or whether there's tools to help you um, create kind of like model routing so that you can use cheaper models for certain activities. But I think that's the one thing I would encourage people to spend more time looking at, because the cost of tokens will come down over time, but how we currently consume them, is going up at the moment, right?
Yeah.
And so I would say that that's probably the one area on harness engineering that people need to spend some time on. So first of all, look at the bigger picture, and
Mhm.
secondly, don't go token maxing, as they call it. That's a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
Go for implement a FinOps type approach where you've got really really good granular control. Actually,
Mhm.
there is one other thing as well, and that is that what I see, okay, in customers is that very few have got good observability in their end-to-end developer life cycle. And so
Mhm.
it's really difficult to know how well these tools are doing if you're not collecting your baseline data. So again, I think another thing that needs to happen is organizations should start thinking hard and fast about how they implement, either the right methodology, the right tools. Dora is a really good starting point, but don't necessarily just settle on that. Today in London, there's Anthropic doing code with Claude, and the guy from Spotify was talking about this in detail, right? And they had only a number of key metrics, right, that they track. So I think it's really important whether it's number of PRs that you're pushing, whether it's
Mhm.
surveys and developer satisfaction. All these kind of things are things that you should start measuring now, but formalize it so that you can track whatever you do, whether it goes upwards or downwards, right?
Makes sense. Got it. All right. I mean, these were the questions, Ricardo. It was great experience talking to you. Thank you so much, Ricardo, for your time. And
No
I'll stay
worries.
in touch on LinkedIn.
Yeah, definitely. Take care.
All right. Yeah.
Uh,
Bye.
bye. Bye.